The Sabbath was never meant to be a burden. It was designed to be a blessing. It's the one commandment that starts with a word most of us have forgotten. Remember. God didn't say remember to pay your bills, remember to go to church, or remember to eat right. He said remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, because he knew we'd forget it. Not in our calendars, but in our hearts. You see, keeping the Sabbath holy is more than avoiding work. It's about honoring the Creator above the creation. It's a sacred appointment with the one who rested, not because he was tired, but because he was finished. The Sabbath is the weekly reminder that our worth doesn't come from what we do. It comes from who he is. But today, many have turned the Sabbath into a checklist instead of a covenant. We treat it like a religious day instead of a divine relationship. And there are 3 warning signs that reveal when the Sabbath is no longer holy in our lives. When what was meant to refresh us begins to lose its power. When worship feels forced. When worship feels forced, something deep within the spirit has gone silent. You may still sing the songs. You may still show up to church. You may still say Happy Sabbath, but the fire that once burned in your soul has cooled to a flicker. The motions remain, but the meaning fades. The words come out, but the heart no longer bleeds. And while everyone else may still see your faith, God sees your fatigue. He sees that what was once passion has become performance. You see, worship was never meant to be mechanical. It was meant to be magnetic. It's supposed to pull you closer to the throne of grace, not push you through another routine. The Sabbath was given to rekindle that intimacy, to remind you that the Creator who rested on the 7th day longs to rest within your heart. But when the Sabbath becomes something we do instead of someone we meet, the soul grows weary. Worship becomes a box to check instead of a fire to chase. There's a danger in becoming so familiar with God's presence that you lose your reverence for it. Israel once sang songs of deliverance when God freed them from Egypt. But when their hearts drifted, those same songs became empty echoes. The book of Isaiah captures God's frustration when he said, "These people draw near to me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." That's what happens when worship becomes forced. It's the sound of lips moving while hearts are still. It's religion without relationship. It's habit without holiness. When you truly love someone, you don't need to be reminded to show affection. You don't have to force it, it flows. But when love grows cold, even the smallest act feels like a chore. And many believers today have fallen into that same place with God. They love the Sabbath, but they've lost the Lord of the Sabbath. They know the doctrine, but not the delight. They attend the service, but they've missed the Spirit. Forced worship often begins subtly. It starts when you stop preparing your heart before the Sabbath arrives. You rush through the week, caught in the noise and grind of life. And when the sun sets on Friday, your mind is still running. You enter the Sabbath physically, but not spiritually. You may sit in the pew, but your thoughts are still at work, still at school, still in your struggles. And because your spirit hasn't been stilled, worship feels heavy instead of holy. It also happens when worship becomes about you instead of Him. When you start asking, "What did I get out of the service?" instead of "What did God get out of me?" that's when the disconnect begins. Worship is not a concert to be enjoyed. It's a covenant to be honored. When we treat it like entertainment, we miss the encounter. The Sabbath is not a day for performance. It's a sanctuary for presence. And when we stop seeking God's presence, we start forcing His praise. You can tell when worship is forced because there's no freedom in it. There's no joy in the prayer, no life in the song, no spark in the word. The hands may rise, but the spirit stays low. The voice may sing, but the heart stays silent. It's like breathing without air. Empty, exhausting, unnatural. And deep down you know something's wrong. You know that the God who once thrilled your soul now feels distant. Not because He left, but because you stopped meeting Him in truth and in spirit. But friend, the good news is this: God doesn't reject a struggling worshiper. He redeems them. He's not looking for perfect worship. He's looking for real worship. If you feel that your praise has grown stale, He's not condemning you. He's calling you back. Because even forced worship can become fiery again when you invite the Holy Spirit to breathe upon. The same God who revived dry bones can revive dry hearts. The same Spirit that filled the upper room can fill your living room. All He needs is honesty, a heart willing to say, Lord, I'm here, but I've been distant. Teach me to love you again. When worship feels forced, it's often a signal, not a sentence. It's God's way of showing you that something in your relationship needs renewal. Maybe you've been carrying burdens too heavy for too long. Maybe you've been trying to please God through performance instead of resting in His presence. The Sabbath was never about proving your worth. It's about remembering His. It's about stepping out of the noise of the week and hearing the whisper of heaven say, be still and know that I am God. To keep the Sabbath holy is to keep your worship honest, not polished, not perfect, honest. God would rather have a broken hallelujah than a flawless performance. He would rather hear your trembling prayer than your rehearsed praise. Because when worship comes from a place of truth, it touches heaven. It reminds you that holiness isn't about how loud you sing, but how surrendered you are. It's not about how many verses you read, but how deeply you let the Word. There's a moment in every believer's life when God strips away the noise and leaves only the heart. That's when you discover whether your worship is forced or faithful. True worship doesn't depend on the music, the preacher, or the crowd. It depends on your connection to Christ. You can be in a quiet room with no instruments and still experience glory if your heart is aligned with heaven. But you can be surrounded by the best choirs, lights, and sermons and still feel empty if your heart is disconnected. So if your worship feels forced, don't run from God, run to Him. Confess it. Tell Him, Lord, I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of just going through the motions. I want the fire back. And the moment you do, something shifts. Because God honors honesty, the Spirit begins to move. The same Sabbath that once felt silent becomes sacred again. The same song that once felt empty begins to overflow with meaning. Worship was never meant to be forced. It was meant to be felt. It's supposed to rise like incense from the heart, not be pushed out by obligation. When you return to that place of true rest in God, the Sabbath transforms from a duty into a delight. You'll stop worrying about how long the service lasts and start losing yourself in His presence. You'll stop watching the clock and start watching the cross. Because at the end of the day, true Sabbath worship is not about keeping time. It's about keeping truth. It's about remembering that the same God who created you is the same God who redeemed you. And when that realization grips your soul, you won't need to force your worship. It will flow like rivers of living water, natural, uncontainable, and alive. So if your worship has felt forced lately, don't be discouraged. You're not too far gone. The Sabbath isn't a punishment. It's a promise. A promise that God is still near, still waiting, still willing to revive your heart. All He asks is that you come real, not rehearsed. Because once the Spirit reignites the flame within, your worship will once again rise like fire before the throne of the Almighty. When the Sabbath becomes routine instead of relationship, something sacred has been lost. The very heart of what God intended for His people to experience every seventh day begins to fade. The Sabbath was never designed to be a mere ritual, a predictable cycle of resting, reading, and repeating. It was meant to be an encounter, a living connection between the Creator and His creation. It's not just about what you do on the Sabbath, it's about who you meet with. When the Sabbath becomes mechanical, it loses its power to restore the soul. In the beginning, when God rested on the seventh day, He wasn't tired. He wasn't worn out. The Creator of the universe doesn't need a break. He doesn't grow weary or faint. He rested because the work was complete. He paused because He wanted to be with His creation. That moment was holy because it was filled with communion. The Sabbath, at its core, is not about ceasing from labor. It's about entering into fellowship. It's the one day that God blessed and sanctified, not because of what He did, but because of what He shared. But over time, humanity turned that sacred space into a schedule. What began as relationship became ritual. What began as love became law. And the danger is that even today, among those who claim to honor the Sabbath, many have fallen into the same trap. They go through the motions. They light the candles, close their shops, put away their work, attend the service, but their hearts are distant. They have remembered the day, but forgotten the one who made it holy. When the Sabbath becomes routine, it no longer refreshes you. You begin to keep it out of obligation, not adoration. You start counting the hours instead of cherishing the moments. The joy that once filled your Friday evenings fades into familiarity. You no longer look forward to meeting with God. You just look forward to finishing another week. And that's the first sign of spiritual dryness. When holy things feel ordinary and sacred moments feel scheduled. Think about how you treat someone you love. When love is alive, every meeting feels new. You don't have to force conversation. It flows naturally. You're excited just to be together. But when that relationship grows cold, even spending time together feels like a duty. You start to say, "Do I have to?" instead of "I can't wait to." The same is true with God. When your Sabbath time feels heavy, boring, or repetitive, it's often a reflection of a heart that's drifted from intimacy. God never wanted the Sabbath to be a lifeless tradition. He wanted it to be a living testimony, a weekly reminder of His presence, His power, and His promise. When He said, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy," He wasn't just asking us to mark a date on a calendar. He was inviting us to mark our hearts with His presence. Holiness isn't found in doing the right things. It's found in being in the right relationship. Jesus confronted this very issue when He walked the earth. The religious leaders of His time had turned the Sabbath into a system of restrictions. They measured holiness by how well someone followed the rules. But Jesus reminded them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. In other words, the Sabbath was never meant to enslave you. It was meant to free you. It was designed to remind you that you belong to a God who values your rest, your renewal, and your relationship with Him. When the Sabbath becomes routine, the mind starts focusing on details instead of devotion. You start debating what counts as work, what you can and can't do, instead of asking, "How can I draw closer to God today?" You start comparing your observance to others, instead of examining your own heart. And while you may appear outwardly obedient, inwardly, the flame of love grows dim. You've kept the form of godliness, but denied the power thereof. The Sabbath should never feel like a checklist. It should feel like a reunion. It's not about sitting quietly for 24 hours. It's about sitting in the presence of your Creator. It's not about escaping from the world. It's about entering into the heart of God. The danger of routine religion is that it numbs you to spiritual reality. You begin to mistake activity for intimacy. You think because you rested, you're right with God. But the truth is, you can rest your body and still have a restless soul. Many people keep the Sabbath physically, but not spiritually. They put down their tools but never put down their burden. They avoid work, but never enter worship. They stop moving, but never start connecting. And God looks down, not for perfection, but for presence. He's asking, "Where are you?" The same question He asked Adam and Eve in the garden. Because the Sabbath isn't just a pause in your week. It's a call back to Eden. It's a call to walk with Him again, to talk with Him again, to remember who you are in His image. If the Sabbath has become routine for you, God isn't angry. He's inviting you deep. He's saying, "Return to me, and I will return to you." The routine can become relationship again. If you open your heart, start by changing your focus. Don't ask, "What should I not do today?" Ask, "Lord, what do you want to show me today?" Don't rush through the hours. Linger in His presence. Let His word speak to you. Let His peace wash over you. The Sabbath isn't about emptying your schedule. It's about filling your soul. When you treat the Sabbath as routine, it feels like a day off. But when you treat it as relationship, it feels like a divine appointment. One restores your energy. The other restores your identity. One gives you a break. The other gives you purpose. That's why the devil works so hard to make the Sabbath boring. He knows that if you ever experience the fullness of God's rest, you'll never crave the world's distractions again. The truth is, routine religion is easy, but relationship requires investment. It means spending time with God, even when you don't feel it. It means coming to Him honestly. No masks, no performance, no pressure, just you and Him. It means saying, Lord, teach me to rest again. Teach me to love your presence. Because when that relationship is rekindled, even the simplest Sabbath moment becomes holy. So ask yourself honestly, have I been keeping the Sabbath out of love or out of habit? Has it become a holy day in my heart, or just another item on my religious to-do list? If your answer reveals routine, don't despair. You can start again. You can rediscover the beauty of communion. You can make the Sabbath more than a pause. You can make it a personal encounter with your Creator. God doesn't want you to simply remember the Sabbath. He wants you to reconnect through it. The Sabbath is His invitation to intimacy. Every week, heaven opens its doors and whispers, "Come away with me." And when you accept that invitation, not out of routine, but out of relationship, you'll find that the Sabbath becomes more than a commandment. It becomes a love story. Because in the end, the true question isn't, are you keeping the Sabbath, but is the Sabbath keeping you? Is it keeping your heart soft? Is it keeping your faith alive? Is it keeping your love for God burning bright? When the answer is yes, then you're not just keeping a day, you're keeping a divine connection that can never be broken. When you keep the day but not the Spirit, you can keep the day perfectly and still miss the heart of what God intended. You can mark every Sabbath on your calendar, attend every service, say every right phrase, and yet completely lose the Spirit behind it. Because holiness was never about simply doing the right thing. It was about becoming the right person. The Sabbath was not given just to be kept. It was given to be experienced. It's not a ritual. It's a relationship. It's not just about resting your body. It's about releasing your soul. When you keep the day but not the Spirit, your obedience becomes empty. You can follow every rule and still feel far from God. The Pharisees in Jesus' time did exactly that. They were masters of the Sabbath law. They knew every detail, every regulation, every restriction. Yet when the Lord of the Sabbath stood before them, they couldn't recognize Him. That's what happens when you worship the commandment more than the commander. You end up protecting the rules while rejecting the relationship. The spirit of the Sabbath is not about restriction. It's about restoration. God didn't say, remember the Sabbath day so you can prove your discipline. He said, remember it to keep it holy. Holiness is not a performance. It's a posture. It's the heart bowing before its Creator, saying, Lord, I trust you more than my schedule. I trust you more than my work. I trust you to do in 6 days what I could never accomplish in 7. When you rest in that faith, you're not just keeping a day. You're living in divine rhythm. But too often, people treat the Sabbath as a badge of identity rather than a bond of intimacy. They boast in the fact that they rest on the right day, but forget that true rest comes from the right relationship. The Sabbath was designed to remind us that God is not only Creator but also Redeemer. It's not a day to display your righteousness, it's a day to declare His. Yet somewhere along the way, many have turned the blessing into a burden, the sign into a system. You can see it in how people approach the day. Some rush to finish work before sunset, but never rush to meet with God. They watch the clock but not the Christ. They focus on the boundaries of time but not the beauty of presence. And so the Sabbath becomes something to survive instead of something to save. You might abstain from labor, but if your heart is filled with anxiety, bitterness, or pride, you're not truly resting. You've kept the form but lost the spirit. Keeping the day without the Spirit is like bringing flowers to your spouse but never speaking from your heart. The gesture looks right, but the love is gone. It's the difference between religion and relationship. Religion says, do this to be accepted. Relationship says, because I am accepted, I do this. The spirit of the Sabbath is about communion, not compliance. It's about drawing near to the one who created rest, not just avoiding activity. When you walk in the spirit of the Sabbath, your focus shifts from duty to delight. You begin to see the day not as something you have to do, but something you get to do. It becomes a time to breathe again, to let the noise of the world fade, to hear the whisper of God in your soul. But when you lose the Spirit, it all feels heavy. The hours drag. The joy is gone. You might be resting your hands but not your heart. And God is not glorified in lifeless obedience. He's glorified in loving surrender. The danger of keeping the day without the Spirit is that it gives you a false sense of holiness. You start to believe that because you've kept the rule, you're right with God. But Scripture says the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. The Sabbath without the Spirit is just another Saturday. It carries no power, no transformation, no encounter. The Spirit is what turns time into holy time. Without Him, you're simply managing hours, not meeting heaven. The Spirit of the Sabbath teaches you to rest in God's grace, not your own goodness. It reminds you that your worth is not in your work, your holiness not in your habits. You could stop working for 24 hours and still strive in your soul. You could close your store but still keep your pride open. You could refrain from buying and selling yet still be consumed by greed. The Spirit of the Sabbath reaches deeper. It sanctifies the soul. It calls you to rest, not only from your labor but from your ego, from your stress, from your sin. When Jesus healed the sick and freed the oppressed on the Sabbath, the religious leaders were angry. To them He was breaking the law, but to heaven He was keeping it perfectly, because the Spirit of the Sabbath is compassion, it's mercy, it's restoration. God never designed the day to be about what you can't do. It's about what He can do through you. When you spend the Sabbath in selfish comfort but ignore those in need, you've missed the heart of the commandment. To keep the spirit of the Sabbath is to reflect the character of God. Kind, just, forgiving, and full of love. Many have forgotten that the Sabbath is not only about ceasing work, it's about celebrating redemption. Every Sabbath is a symbol of the eternal rest that Christ offers. When you sit quietly in His presence, you are practicing eternity. You are rehearsing heaven. That's why the spirit of the Sabbath is so vital. It points your heart homeward. It's a weekly reminder that we are not saved by effort, but by grace. If you find yourself keeping the day but feeling disconnected, it's time to ask yourself, what's missing? The answer isn't more rules, it's more relationship. Invite the Spirit of God into your rest. Ask Him to make the Sabbath more than a day off. Let it be a day of transformation. Before you enter the Sabbath, pray, Lord, meet me in this time. Let your Spirit fill this space. Let my rest be worship. When you do, you'll find that even silence becomes sacred. Even stillness becomes song. The spirit of the Sabbath can turn ordinary moments into holy ones. A quiet walk can become worship. A family meal can become ministry. Reading scripture can become revelation. Because when the Spirit is present, everything becomes alive. But when He's absent, even your best efforts feel empty. Keeping the day without the Spirit is like breathing without oxygen. You're going through the motions, but you're not truly alive. God never asked for mechanical obedience. He asked for surrendered heart. The Sabbath was given not to make you more religious, but to make you more relational, to reconnect you to the one who made you and redeemed you. The spirit of the Sabbath is freedom. Freedom from worry. Freedom from guilt. Freedom from the endless race to prove your worth. It's the kind of rest that makes you whisper, "It is finished." Not because you've done everything right, but because He already has. So the question is not just, am I keeping the Sabbath? The deeper question is the spirit of the Sabbath keeping me? Is it changing how I think, how I love, how I forgive, how I live? Because when you truly keep the Spirit, the Sabbath stops being a day you observe. It becomes a life you live. Every heartbeat becomes a hymn of gratitude. Every breath becomes an act of worship. You don't wait for the Sabbath to feel holy. You carry its peace into every day that follows. When you keep the day but not the Spirit, the Sabbath ends and nothing changes. But when you keep the Spirit, the Sabbath never ends. It follows you into Monday, into Tuesday, into every storm and every struggle. That's the power of true rest. It's not a rule to follow, it's a relationship to live in. So don't settle for the shadow when you can have the substance. Don't just mark the day. Meet the God who made it, because when you find Him, you'll discover that the spirit of the Sabbath isn't confined to time, it lives within you.